Right at the top of this edition, this midweek edition of The Right Stand, we begin with a person who stood solid, strong, robust against the Taliban, against terrorism, has been unabashed at it, and he's somebody who's waiting to get back to his homeland. Nearly 2 years in exile, Amrullah Saleh, with his first interview to a news network ever since the regime change in Afghanistan. He's stood steadfast in his not just love for Afghanistan, but also his innate hatred for terrorism. Afghanistan's acting president-in-exile, Amrullah Saleh, speaking to the News18 network, to CNN News18, exclusively from an undisclosed location. This is Mr. Saleh's first ever interview in almost 2 years to any media publication around the world. And that's why it's a world exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. In its first interview post his exile, where Amrullah Saleh decodes his plan and speaks on various issues around in the country, in Afghanistan, from the Taliban to the Israel-Hamas attack to the Ukraine war. Amrullah Saleh giving insight on the issues that matter on geopolitical conditions. Let's try and break this down for you, the full text and the various aspects or highlights of this highlighted on our website news18.com. One of the first questions that was posed to him and the conversation he had with us here at News18 along with our group editor security Manoj Gupta, the question that was posed to him was Mahmoud Shah Habibi, a former deputy chief of Afghanistan's aviation authority, was he the man who leaked the whereabouts of Al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri to the United States of America? Because an American drone strike killed Ayman al-Zawahiri, a key plotter of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the second in command to Osama bin Laden. The US took over as the leader of Al-Qaeda after Osama bin Laden's death in 2011. Amrullah Saleh actually bringing forth his theory on who tipped off the US and who is responsible for the death of Ayman al-Zawahiri. In his theory, he actually extrapolates how the US may have reached out to the Al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri, and he says, and I quote, that there was an agreement between the US's Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, the ISI and the Haqqanis on the Al-Qaeda. However, there was no discussion on the fate of Ayman al-Zawahiri. Once this entire set of conversations happened, the US has been in secret negotiations with the Taliban over his release. Washington keeps silent on the matter to deter domestic pressure, especially ahead of upcoming presidential elections. Habibi is a high-value hostage for the Taliban. They also goes out and says that in August 2021, the United States and its NATO allies withdrew from Afghanistan after 2 decades of war with the Taliban, paving the way for a resurgent Islamist group. President Ashraf Ghani fled the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan on the 15th of August 2021, and Amrullah Saleh declared himself as the acting president of the country and is leading this fight against the Taliban. He's vowed to take back Afghanistan from the Talib. This is what he said: "We will get our areas back. We are countering the Taliban internally and externally. They will lose. The Taliban is a proxy, very clearly, and a malicious force. We will fight till they agree to a process for establishment of a legitimate system in Afghanistan." He's very, very clear. He also has very clearly said that the Western narrative that they didn't abandon Afghanistan, that's not true. Only corrupt politicians completely wrong and self-serving. There was a geopolitical scheme. They negotiated with the Taliban for almost 10 years to agree on the terms of exit, and they were expecting us to agree to the Taliban in 5 days to rubber stamp the Doha Agreement, in which there is hardly any mention of the Afghan people and the Afghan people's rights. That's what Amrullah Saleh says. What took them 10 years to negotiate, they could manage. They didn't give us even 5 days to think about. And there was no mention of the Afghan people and their own rights when the Americans decided to walk out. So he's also saying a double stab there, saying they were engaging with the Taliban for nearly a decade. They never kept us in the loop and they left us in the lurch. Now, speaking on the Afghan-Taliban issue, Amrullah Saleh said that opposing the Taliban are facing a couple of challenges that are beyond their capabilities, those who are opposing the Taliban. Now, this is one of the issues. He says that there is the $60 million per week aid from the US to the Taliban. That's the stall claim he's making, which is giving it maneuverability to use national revenue for consolidation of repressive conduct. The US aid is auctioned in Afghanistan. People with direct link to the Haqqanis, an Afghan Islamist insurgent group built around the family of the same name, NGOs, they deliver services to areas identified by the Taliban. So the Taliban are actually using aid money to help themselves. That's what they are doing. They are actually using money that is supposed to be given to the help of all of Afghanistan for their own self. Now, according to Amrullah Saleh, Taliban's opposition is looking at three main areas: knowing the Taliban internal and external fight, and multiple voices that some believe in gradual softening of the Taliban. They are saying that there are elements which are being paid so that the external forces against the Taliban do not unite. Total number of casualties in direct combat with the Taliban over the last 2 years is 1,000 men. Around 5,000 of our sympathizers and supporters are in detention of the Taliban. They have saturated areas of our activities with their militia. They are operating from an environment that is not willing to let us unite. The Ankara-based alliance is less willing to engage with the Taliban militarily. They want to sell the Doha Agreement to allies. Some won't return to Afghanistan without a process or referendum to determine the type of state. Then there is the us who say this dispensation is illegitimate. So clearly he's saying that there are elements that are keeping those opposed to the Taliban apart. They're not allowing them to unite, and some of them are being paid to keep this disunity going. Meanwhile, so that's what he's saying. We consider it dispensable and illegitimate, but others are being forced. Their hand is being forced and we're not being allowed to unite. Amrullah Saleh, while speaking with CNN News 18, also revealed that the Afghanistan-Taliban region was initially fooled by Pakistan's ISI, Interstate Intelligence. Pakistanis did a diplomatic initiative asking the region to give the Taliban 6 months for the AFPAC negotiations. Qataris started another campaign. The second Taliban is in no way less associated with the ISI than the first, he says. And he's also saying further, as Pakistan continues to push terrorists into Indian soil and bleed our braves and civilians, Amrullah Saleh is saying India should not underestimate the link. India should not underestimate the link between Pakistan and Afghanistan Taliban. He's also warned of possible attacks. He said, you can't underestimate the connection between the Pakistan's ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, and the Taliban post-2021. Some Indian analysts are underestimating the linkage between the two. They're underestimating the linkage between Pakistan's madrasa system and Afghanistan Taliban. They are saying the infrastructure is deep and has strong influence on the Taliban leadership. They're further saying that if Pakistan stops supporting the Taliban regime, it will collapse. Some are influenced by Taliban leaders such as Mullah Yaqub, but it will all change when you have another terror attack. I hope I am wrong, but another terror attack on Indian soil is coming. This is what Amrullah Saleh's warning is. He sees another terror attack on Indian soil coming, and somewhere the ISI and the Taliban will be linked to it. Even as the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan continues to clash with Pakistani administration in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan areas, Amrullah Saleh has said the ISI looks at it as a smaller issue and rubbish the belief that Pakistan lacks the resources to co-opt Taliban. They may be nearing financial bankruptcy, but they have the wherewithal. This is why Taliban is trying to reach out to other countries. It is a matter of time before this mask will fall off. There are nearly 300 officers from Pakistan's ISI accredited in Afghanistan and twice the number operating in the country under the garb of doctors, NGOs and business persons. This is not a veiled program. ISI officers and engineers are directly involved in interception operations. Pakistan's SSG officers are providing training to the Taliban strike units. Pakistani mentors in strategic communication of Taliban. The fatwa was architecture by Mufti Rauf. He stayed in Pakistan for 30 years. He was a close associate of Pakistani politician Fazlur Rahman and is currently the chief of the fatwa department of the Supreme Court of Taliban. Rauf drafted the 51-point fatwa after a call from Rahman and a visit from an ISI officer. Amrullah Saleh is telling CNN News18, Pakistan as an Islamic country is a promoter of religious fanaticism and extremism. India can only influence certain people in Taliban, not their thought process and their ideological conduct. Very, very strong words coming in from Amrullah Saleh. Last but not the least, this entire Israel-Hamas fracas and this scenario, Israel witnessing a surprise and unprecedented multi-front attack. These are the statements where he is very clearly saying that a lot of the Taliban's actions are dictated by the ISI, influenced by the madrasa system in Pakistan. Now let's talk about the current scenario, ladies and gentlemen. Unprecedented multi-front attack by air, land and sea by the Hamas. And speaking on the issue, Amrullah Saleh is saying that the Hamas attack is possibly an inspiration for other terror groups and will lead to repetition. He says inspirational for other terror groups and even lead to repetition. This is his first ever interview in almost 2 years to any media publication around the world, and it has established Iran and Hamas as master of security in the Middle East above Saudi Arabia, UAE and Bahrain. Saudi and Israel can join hands, but the sentiment on the streets will not change. It has immediately brought the Ukraine issue to number 2, which is good for Moscow. Israel's retaliation will also act as a precedent, which the US will now not be able to stop. This is what Hamas wanted. It is inspirational for any militant group. It will lead to repetition. 1, occupation. These are the 3 methods which will be tough for Israel, as it will have to fight and feed the enemy. Another is a UN-led peacekeeping force, which is tougher, considering the troops may not want to enter a volatile region. Third is negotiations with Hamas, which will give them recognition. Russia doesn't even recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization. The world isn't divided along very, very clear lines as Washington and Tel Aviv wish. It is far more complicated. But amidst all this, what stands out is Hamas's actions could embolden other terrorist outfits to carry out similar strikes, and India needs to watch out given what's brewing in Afghanistan and currently in the Middle East. This is the Amrullah Saleh exclusive. To peruse the entire detailed interview and its various subsections on News18.com, let's get a move on here on The Right Stand, ladies and gentlemen.